The email notification arrived at 6 on a Tuesday morning, and it ended my marriage before Diane even woke up. I'd been sitting in my home office for about 20 minutes by then, working through my first cup of coffee and scrolling through genealogy forms. 3 months into retirement, I'd developed this routine: wake up before dawn, let Diane sleep, and chase down records from County Cork where my grandmother always swore our people came from. It was supposed to be a hobby, something to keep my mind sharp after 35 years of tracking shipments across 6 continents for Allied Freight Solutions. The 23andMe notification sat in my inbox like an unexploded bomb. Close family match. Found, Brian Tillman. Son, 99.7% probability. I read it 3 times, then 4. My coffee went cold on the desk beside me, and I didn't notice for another hour. Most men, I think, would have panicked. Maybe stormed into the bedroom and shaken their wife awake, demanding answers. Maybe convinced themselves it was some kind of system error, a glitch in the algorithm. But I spent 35 years building a career on meticulous tracking, on following paper trails across oceans and through bureaucracies that would make Kafka weep. I knew how to investigate. More importantly, I knew that the first person who speaks in an interrogation loses. So I didn't wake Diane. I didn't confront her. I took a screenshot of the notification, saved it to a USB drive I kept in my desk drawer, and started clicking. Brian Tillman. Born March 14, 1993. I did the math automatically, the way I used to calculate shipping times and customs delays. March 1993. Conception approximately June 1992. June 1992. Frankfurt. The memory surfaced like a body rising from deep water. In May of that year, my company had sent me to Germany for a 6-month logistics overhaul. It was a career-making assignment, the kind of project that separates middle managers from executives. Diane and I had been married for 2 years. She'd refused to come with me, said she'd hold down the fort back home in Columbus. 2 weeks after I landed in Frankfurt, she called and said she wanted a separation. Said long distance was too hard. I remember standing in my rented apartment with the phone pressed to my ear, watching rain streak down the windows, feeling like the floor had dropped out from under me. I came back in November. We reconciled immediately. She seemed eager, almost desperate. At the time, I thought she'd just missed me. I thought we'd grown up, the way young couples do when they survive their first real test. Mark was born in August 1993, 5 months after this Brian Tillman. I sat in my office chair and stared at the wall for a long time. The house was silent around me. Down the hall, my wife of 33 years was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about whatever retired women dream about. Grandchildren she kept asking Mark to give us, maybe, or that trip to Italy we'd been planning. She'd looked me in the eyes for 32 years. Every anniversary, every Christmas morning, every time she'd said, "I love you." Every single day had been a performance. I opened a new browser tab and started searching for Brian Tillman. It took me a week to build the file. Brian lived in Westerville, 20 minutes from my house. He worked as a firefighter and paramedic, 14-year veteran of the department. Unmarried, no children. His social media accounts were private, but I found a news article from 2 years back. He'd received a commendation for pulling a family of 4 from a burning house. There was a photo. I stared at that photo for what felt like hours. He had my father's jawline, my eyes, the shape of his hands, even in the way he was holding the plaque they'd given him. He looked like he belonged in my family photos. He looked like my son. I didn't cry. I'm not a man who cries easily, never have been. What I felt was something worse, a kind of vertigo, like the entire structure of my life had shifted 3 inches to the left, and everything I thought I knew was suddenly wrong. I kept digging. The first thing I learned was that Brian had been searching for years. I found references on adoption forums, anonymous posts from someone matching his timeline, asking questions about Grace Harbor adoptions, about how to navigate sealed records in Ohio, about whether it was worth the emotional risk of submitting DNA to consumer databases. He'd been on this road for a decade and a half before I even knew there was a road to travel. That realization sat in my chest like a stone. My son had been out there, reaching out into the darkness, hoping someone would reach back. And I'd been 20 minutes away, living my comfortable life, completely oblivious. I contacted an old acquaintance named Earl Whitmore, a former police detective who'd done some security consulting for my company years back. We met for coffee at a place near his office, a dingy little spot that served terrible sandwiches but made the best espresso in Columbus. "You look like a man who didn't sleep last night," Earl said when he sat down across from me. "I look like a man who found out he has a son he never knew about." Earl's eyebrows went up. He was a big guy, broad-shouldered and weathered, the kind of man who'd seen enough in 30 years of police work that very little surprised him anymore. But that got his attention. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. The DNA match. The timeline. The suspicious gap in 1992 when Diane had supposedly been visiting her mother in Cincinnati. Earl listened without interrupting, his coffee getting cold in front of him, his expression shifting from curious to grim as the story unfolded. "I need help tracking down adoption records," I finished. The agency was called Grace Harbor Adoptions. They were based in Cincinnati. Earl nodded slowly. "I know someone who specializes in this kind of thing. Old court records, sealed files, the stuff that's supposed to stay buried." He met my eyes. "This won't be cheap, and it won't be fast. And there's no guarantee we'll find what you're looking for." "I don't care about cheap or fast. I care about the truth." 3 days later, he called me back. "Brian Tillman was adopted at birth through a private agency in Cincinnati," Earl said. "Place called Grace Harbor Adoptions. Closed down in 2008. Birth mother's name on the amended records is listed as Jane Doe." "What about the original records?" "Sealed tighter than a drum." But here's the interesting part, Stephen. This kid's been searching for his biological parents for 15 years. He's submitted DNA to every database that exists, 23andMe, Ancestry, GED match, you name it. He's been looking for exactly the kind of match he just found. I sat with that for a long moment. My son, had spent 15 years trying to find me. 15 years of hoping and waiting and probably being disappointed over and over again. And the whole time, I'd been 20 minutes away, completely oblivious to his existence. "There's more," Earl said, "and you're not going to like it." At this point, I'm not sure anything could make this worse. Don't bet on it. The adoption agency records show a secondary family contact who helped arrange everything. Woman named Patricia Ashworth. My blood ran cold. Patricia Ashworth was Diane's mother. She'd died in 2015. I'd attended the funeral. I'd held Diane's hand while she cried. I'd given a toast at the reception about what a wonderful woman Patricia had been, how much she'd meant to our family. And the whole time she'd been carrying this secret to her grave. "Stephen, you still there?" "Yeah," I managed. "Yeah, I'm here." "Thanks, Earl. Send me everything you've got." "Stephen." His voice was careful now, the way it probably got when he'd had to deliver bad news to families during his years on the force. What are you planning to do with this information? I don't know yet, but I'm going to do something. After I hung up, I sat in my office for another hour, not moving. This wasn't just Diane's secret. Her mother had helped. They'd planned this together, executed it together, kept it hidden together for more than 3 decades. I thought about Patricia's face at family dinners, the way she'd always seemed to look at me with something that might have been guilt. Or maybe that was just my memory rewriting itself, trying to find clues that had never been there. And the only other person who knew the truth was dead. I spent the next 3 days deciding how to handle this. The logical move would have been to confront Diane first. Get her side of the story, give her a chance to explain. That's what a reasonable husband would do, right? That's what the marriage counselors and the relationship experts would recommend. But I'd spent 35 years in logistics, and I understood something about information that most people don't. Whoever controls the narrative controls the outcome. If I confronted Diane first, she'd have time to construct a story, to contact Brian herself, to position herself as the victim of circumstances rather than the architect of a deception. She'd been doing it for 32 years. She was good at it. Brian deserved better than that. He deserved to hear the truth from someone who wouldn't try to manipulate him. I sent him a message through the 23andMe system. I recently discovered our connection, and I believe I may be your biological father. I did not know you existed until this week. I would like to meet you, if you're willing, to explain what I've learned. I'm sorry it took this long. His response came 4 hours later. I've been waiting 32 years for someone to say that. When and where? We met at a diner called Rosie's Kitchen, a little roadside place halfway between Westerville and my suburb. I chose it deliberately. Somewhere neither of us had history, neutral ground. It was a Tuesday afternoon, around 2, quiet enough that we'd have privacy. I got there early and took a booth near the back. The waitress, a tired-looking woman in her 50s with a name tag that said June, brought me coffee and asked if I was waiting for someone. I said yes. She nodded and left me alone. Brian walked in at 2:03. The air went out of my lungs. He was taller than I'd expected from the photos. About my height, maybe an inch taller. He had my build, my father's hands, but Diane's coloring, darker hair, those light hazel eyes that had made me fall in love with her back when I was 22 and didn't know any better. He was wearing civilian clothes, jeans and a gray pullover, but he moved like someone who was used to being in charge of crisis situations. He spotted me immediately. We stared at each other for a long moment. Two men separated by 32 years of lies, trying to figure out how to bridge that gap. Then he walked over and slid into the booth across from me. "Stephen Lawson," he said. It wasn't a question. "Brian Tillman." We sat there for a few seconds, neither of us knowing what to say next. June came by and asked if he wanted anything. He ordered coffee, black. She disappeared again. "So," Brian said finally, "you really didn't know?" I really didn't know. I pulled out my phone, showed him the screenshot of the notification. "This was the first I heard of your existence. 8 days ago." He studied the screen, then looked back up at me. His expression was hard to read, hope and skepticism, and something that might have been anger, all mixed together. "I've had false alarms before," he said. "Distant cousins who seemed promising, then turned out to be dead ends. Half matches that went nowhere. After 15 years of searching, you learn not to get your hopes up too fast." "I understand, but this isn't a false alarm." "No." He was quiet for a moment. It isn't. Walk me through it, he said. From the beginning. All of it. I want to understand how this happened. So I did. I told him about Frankfurt in 1992, about the 6-month assignment and Diane's refusal to come with me, about the phone call where she said she wanted a separation, about the months of silence, about coming home in November to find her eager to reconcile. How eager? He asked. She was at the airport waiting for me, practically threw herself into my arms. I thought. I stopped, the memory souring as I reprocessed it with new information. I thought she'd realized how much she loved me. I thought being apart had taught her something. Sounds like it taught her something, all right. I told him about finding the gap in our photo albums, how there were almost no pictures of Diane from August to November of that year, a period I'd always assumed was just the painful months of our separation, too raw to document. She told me she spent that time with her mother in Cincinnati, I said. I thought she was heartbroken. I thought she was mourning our marriage. I never imagined that she was pregnant. That she was pregnant with my child and hiding it from me. Brian was quiet for a long moment. June brought his coffee. He wrapped his hands around the mug but didn't drink. Who's my biological mother? He asked finally, even though I knew he already suspected. My wife, Diane. We're still married. I paused. Not for long. His face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Shock, then anger, then something that looked like grief. So she just kept living her life? Had another kid? You have a brother, Mark. He's 2 years younger than you. He doesn't know either. Brian set down his coffee mug and leaned back in the booth. He ran both hands through his hair, a gesture I recognized because I did the exact same thing when I was trying to process something overwhelming. I have a brother, he said quietly. You have a brother. And a mother who threw me away like garbage. I didn't have an answer for that. What could I possibly say? My adoptive father died 7 years ago, Brian said after a while. His voice was steadier now, but I could hear the effort it cost him. Heart attack, totally unexpected. He was a good man. Treated me like his own from day one. When he passed, I thought I'd never have a dad again. I thought that was it. I reached across the table and gripped his forearm. It was instinct more than thought. The same way I'd reached out to Mark 1,000 times over the years, steadying him, letting him know I was there. I'm here now, I said. I'm not going anywhere. Brian had something else to tell me. Last year, I hired a genealogist, he said. Someone who specialized in tracking down closed adoption records. She managed to find some documentation from Grace Harbor before it shut down. There was a notation in my file, a handwritten note about a secondary family contact who helped arrange everything. Patricia Ashworth. Brian looked surprised. You already knew? I hired my own investigator. Patricia Ashworth was Diane's mother. She died in 2015. So she knew. This whole time she knew. She didn't just know. She orchestrated it. She was the one who signed as family representative on the intake documents. She made dozens of phone calls to the agency during the pregnancy. This wasn't a panicked young woman making a rash decision, Brian. This was a calculated operation. Brian absorbed this. His jaw tightened. There's something else, he said. Something I found that I haven't shown anyone yet. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his photos until he found what he was looking for. It was a photograph of a handwritten letter, the paper yellowed with age. The adoption agency kept this in my file, he said. A letter from my birth mother. I got it when I requested my records last year. I took the phone and read. To my son. I'm sorry. I know you'll never understand, but I couldn't keep you. Your father would never forgive me if he knew, and I couldn't lose everything. Please know that I will think of you every day. I hope you find a family that loves you. I'll love you from far away, where it's safe. D. I read it 3 times, trying to reconcile the words with the woman I'd been married to for 33 years. Your father would never forgive me. As if this was somehow my fault. As if her affair and her pregnancy and her decision to give away our child was something I'd driven her to. She thought about you every day, I said quietly. While she was raising Mark. While she was packing his lunch and driving him to soccer practice. She was thinking about the son she gave away. No, Brian's voice was flat. She doesn't get to claim that. She doesn't get to love me from far away where it's safe. That's not how love works. That's how cowardice works. I handed back his phone. I agree. I spent the next week continuing my investigation. Earl Whitmore dug deeper into the paper trail, and what he found made my stomach turn. Diane's mother had lived in Cincinnati in 1992 and 1993, the same city as Grace Harbor adoptions. Earl found old phone records, a documentation trail showing dozens of calls between Patricia and the agency during Diane's pregnancy. On the intake documents, Diane was listed as a minor. She was 24 at the time. Someone had falsified records to make the adoption easier to process. This wasn't just a secret. It was a conspiracy. I went through our old photo albums more carefully, documenting the gap from August to November 1992. There were 3 pictures of Diane from that entire period, all of them carefully cropped to show only her face and shoulders. In retrospect, it was obvious. At the time, I'd been too focused on rebuilding our marriage to notice. I consulted with a divorce attorney named Janet Reynolds, a sharp woman in her 60s who'd handled high-profile cases for years. She walked me through Ohio's equitable distribution laws, explained how our assets would be divided after 33 years of marriage. The affair itself doesn't dramatically affect divorce proceedings in this state, she told me. Not legally, anyway. You're looking at a fairly standard split of marital property. I don't care about winning financially, I said. I want the truth on the record. I want my sons to know what happened. She nodded slowly. Then we can make sure that happens. Earl called me again on a Saturday morning. I was sitting in a coffee shop downtown, working through the stack of documents he'd sent me, when my phone buzzed. Got another piece of the puzzle for you, he said. The biological father. My heart rate spiked. You found him? Dennis Keller. He was your neighbor in 1992, lived 2 houses down from you and Diane. Moved away suddenly in late 1992. Ring any bells? Dennis Keller. The name hit me like a physical blow. I remembered him. Of course I remembered him. He and his wife had been part of our social circle. Barbecues in the summer, the occasional poker night. He was a sales rep for some pharmaceutical company, traveled a lot. His wife was quiet, kept to herself. They'd moved away right before I came back from Frankfurt, and I'd never thought to question why. He's still alive, Earl continued. 61 years old, living in Dayton. Divorced twice. Never had kids, or so he thought. I sat there in the coffee shop, surrounded by strangers tapping on laptops and couples chatting over lattes, and I felt the shape of the betrayal expand even further. My wife. Her mother. And my neighbor, the man I'd played cards with, the man who'd borrowed my lawnmower, the man who'd attended my birthday party 6 weeks before I left for Frankfurt. All of them had known. All of them had chosen silence. "What do you want me to do with this?" Earl asked. "Nothing yet," I said. "One revelation at a time." I told Mark on a Tuesday evening. He lived in an apartment on the east side of the city, a nice place with good light and a view of the park. I'd helped him move in 3 years earlier, when he'd gotten his job as a physical therapist at the university hospital. He was 30 years old, successful in his career, starting to talk seriously about his girlfriend Emily and what might come next. He had his whole life ahead of him, and I was about to drop a bomb in the middle of it. I knocked on his door at 7. He answered in sweats and a t-shirt, clearly not expecting company. "Dad? What's going on? I need to talk to you about something. Can I come in?" His face went pale. "Is it Mom? Is she okay? Is she sick?" "Your mother's fine, physically." "Physically? That's not exactly reassuring, Dad." He stepped aside to let me in. His apartment was neat, the way he always kept things. That was something he'd gotten from me. Everything in its proper place. I wondered if that would change after tonight. I wondered if anything would ever feel properly placed again. We sat down in his living room. He was on the edge of the couch, tense with worry. "Dad, you're scaring me. Just tell me." So I told him. I started with the DNA test and the genealogy project and the notification that had landed in my inbox 16 days earlier. I told him about Brian Tillman, the firefighter who lived 20 minutes away. I told him about his mother's separation, her time in Cincinnati, the pregnancy she'd hidden, and the child she'd given away. Mark listened without interrupting. His face went through a familiar progression. The same one I'd seen on Brian's face, the same one I'd probably worn myself that first morning. Disbelief, then calculation, then horror. "I was born in 93, he said finally. "If Brian was born in March, and I was born in August. Mom was pregnant with him No, she was pregnant with him during the separation. She had him, gave him away, then came back to me. You were conceived after we reconciled." Mark stared at me. "She had a baby, and she just threw him away." "Yes. And then she had me." "Yes." He was quiet for a long time. I could see him working through it, the same way I had, reassessing every memory, every family gathering, every moment his mother had smiled at him and told him she loved him. "Did she even want me?" he asked quietly. "Or was I just the replacement?" "You were never a replacement," I said. "You were loved. Are loved. This doesn't change what you mean to me, Mark. Not one bit. But it changes who she is." He looked at me with something raw in his eyes. I could have had a brother, my whole life. All those years when I was lonely, when I wished I had someone to talk to who understood what it was like to be a Lawson. I had a brother, and she made sure I never knew. There was nothing I could say to that. It was true. "What are you going to do?" he asked. "I'm divorcing her. I've already talked to a lawyer." Mark nodded slowly. There was no hesitation, no, "give her a chance." No, "maybe there's an explanation." He understood immediately. Some betrayals are too large to forgive. "Good," he said. We sat in silence for another minute. Then Mark stood up. "I want to meet him. Brian, my brother. He wants to meet you too." They met at a park near Brian's fire station 3 days later. I wasn't there. This was something they needed to do without me hovering over them. But Mark told me about it afterward in my apartment, sitting across from me with a beer in his hand and something new in his eyes. Something that looked a lot like hope. Brian had come straight from a shift, still wearing part of his uniform. Mark said the moment he saw him, he knew. There was something in the way Brian walked, the way he held himself, that was unmistakably family. It was like looking at a stranger who was wearing our family face, Mark told me. He had your eyes, Dad, and Grandpa's jawline. I could see both of you in him. They'd shaken hands first, standing there in the parking lot like two business partners meeting for the first time. Then Brian had pulled Mark into a hug, a real one, the kind brothers give each other, tight and long. They talked for 3 hours on a park bench, watching kids play on the swings while they tried to compress 32 years of lost time into a single conversation. Mark told Brian about holidays and family vacations, about learning to drive in the parking lot behind the high school, about all the mundane moments that make up a life. Brian told Mark about growing up adopted in Cincinnati, about his parents Ray and Carol, about always feeling different even in a loving home, about the years of searching that had finally led here. I told him about the Christmas we tried to put up the tree by ourselves, Mark said. Remember that? When I was 12 and you were out of town for work and I convinced Mom to let me help? I remember. You called me at midnight because the tree had fallen over and broken half the ornaments. Yeah, well, I told Brian that story. And you know what he said? He said that when he was 12, his adoptive dad let him put up their tree too. Same year, probably the same week. And their tree fell over too. Mark's voice got thick when he told me that part. We both ended up in jobs where we help people, Mark continued. I'm a physical therapist, he's a paramedic. We were joking about it. Maybe it's genetic. Maybe it's something you both needed, I said. A way of proving you were worth something. Mark was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Brian asked me if I thought he should meet Mom, our mother. What did you tell him? I told him that was his choice to make. But I also told him what I thought, that she doesn't deserve the chance to explain herself, that anything she says will just be more manipulation, more justification for what she did. She's had 32 years to practice her excuses. What did he say to that? He said he used to have a whole speech prepared, 15 years of things he wanted to say to her, all the questions, all the anger, all the things he'd imagined saying when he finally found her. Mark paused. But now he just wants to ask her one question. What question? Mark looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was I really so terrible that she had to pretend I never existed? I confronted Diane on day 25. I'd waited deliberately, given myself time to gather documentation, to consult with lawyers, to make sure my sons were informed before she had a chance to spin her version of events. I wanted to be calm when I did this. I wanted to be precise. She'd spent 32 years operating from a position of superior information, and I intended to strip that advantage away completely. She was in the living room when I found her, watching some cooking show on television, a glass of wine on the end table beside her. Relaxed, comfortable, blissfully unaware that her entire life was about to collapse. I picked up the remote and turned off the TV. Stephen, what's wrong? I know about Brian. Her face didn't change immediately. There was a delay, like a computer processing unexpected input. Then, very slowly, her expression shifted toward confusion. Brian? Brian who? Our son, the one you gave away in 1993. The color drained from her face so fast I thought she might faint. She gripped the arm of the couch like it was the only thing keeping her upright. I don't know what you're talking about. I set the DNA report on the coffee table in front of her. Then the adoption agency records. Then a printed copy of the letter she'd written to our son 32 years ago. Your mother helped, I said. I know everything, Diane. She stared at the documents like they were rattlesnakes coiled on her coffee table. It was 32 years ago, she finally managed. We were separated. You were gone. You were still my wife. You were pregnant with my child. And you gave him away without telling me. I was scared. Her voice cracked. I didn't know what to do. You knew exactly what to do. You did it perfectly. You hid a pregnancy, falsified adoption records, enlisted your mother to help cover your tracks. You didn't stumble into this, Diane. You executed it like a military operation. She was crying now, tears streaming down her cheeks. I made a mistake. I was young. I was alone. You weren't alone. Dennis Keller was right down the street. That stopped her cold. Yeah, I said. I know about Dennis too, my neighbor. The guy I played poker with once a month. The guy who borrowed my tools and came to my birthday parties. I know he's the biological father. I know he ran off to avoid the consequences. I know everything, Diane. Her mouth opened and closed, but nothing came out. She looked like a fish pulled from water, gasping for air that wasn't there. How long? I asked. How long were you sleeping with him while I was in Frankfurt? Was it the whole 6 months? Or just long enough to get pregnant? Stephen, please, it wasn't like that. Then tell me what it was like. Tell me how my wife ended up pregnant with my neighbor's child while I was working 14-hour days trying to build a future for us. I was lonely. The words burst out of her, raw and desperate. You were thousands of miles away. You barely called. I felt like I didn't even exist anymore. Dennis was just... He was there. He paid attention to me. He made me feel like I mattered. So you slept with him. It was a mistake. It shouldn't have happened, I know that. But when I found out I was pregnant, I panicked. I didn't know what to do. You could have told me. You would have left me. You don't know that. Yes, I do. She was sobbing now, ugly heaving sounds that shook her whole body. I know you, Stephen. I've been married to you for 33 years. You're not the kind of man who forgives something like this. You would have walked away, and I would have had nothing. I would have been a single mother with a baby from an affair. My life would have been over. So instead, you gave away our child and let me live a lie for 32 years. That was the better option? I didn't know what else to do, she whispered. My mother helped. She said it was the only way. She said if I just handled it quietly, no one would ever have to know. Your mother. Your dead mother, who I mourned with you. Who I gave a eulogy for at her funeral. She knew the whole time. Diane nodded miserably. And Rebecca? Your sister? The look on her face told me everything. Great, great. So your entire family knew. Everyone except me and our actual children. We were the only ones kept in the dark. She tried to speak, but nothing came out. Just a strangled sound that might have been the beginning of a word. I could have forgiven an affair, I said. My voice was steady, calmer than I'd expected actually. The rage had burned through me over the past weeks, leaving something colder and more precise behind. People make mistakes. Marriages survive infidelity all the time. I could have forgiven a lot of things. Stephen, please. But you had my son. Our son. And you gave him away like he was a problem to be solved. You let him grow up wondering why he wasn't good enough. You let me live for 32 years not knowing he existed. And every single day you looked me in the eyes and lied. Not by omission, by action. Every single day was a choice to keep lying. That's not a mistake, Diane. That's a way of life. She was sobbing now, ugly heaving sounds that might have moved me once. They didn't move me now. I'm sorry, she gasped. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to lose you. You didn't lose me then, I said. You're losing me now. I placed the divorce papers on the coffee table, on top of all the evidence of her deception. Janet Reynolds has already prepared everything. I'll be staying at a hotel. The house will need to be sold. We'll divide everything according to the law. I don't want anything more than what's fair. I just want this marriage to be over. She looked up at me, her face wrecked, her mascara running in dark streaks down her cheeks. After 33 years, she whispered, you're just going to throw it all away? Something shifted in my chest. Not sympathy exactly, but a kind of dark wonder at the audacity of that question. You threw away a child, I said. Don't talk to me about what I'm throwing away. I picked up my suitcase, packed and waiting by the door, and walked out of the house I'd lived in for 28 years. I didn't look back. The fallout was swift and brutal. Diane called Mark repeatedly in the days that followed. He didn't answer for nearly a week, let every call go to voicemail, watched the notifications pile up on his phone like a guilt trip he wasn't ready to receive. When he finally picked up, it was because he wanted to hear what she had to say for herself. He told me about it afterward. She kept saying she was sorry, Mark said. Over and over. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, please let me explain. Like she thought if she apologized enough times, it would make up for 32 years of lies. What did you tell her? I told her I needed time to process the fact that I had a brother my whole life and she chose to lie about it. I told her I didn't know if I could ever look at her the same way again. He paused. She started crying, begging, saying I was all she had left. And I told her that wasn't my problem. She made choices, and now she was living with them. Just like Brian had to live with her choices his whole life. She tried to reach Brian next. Called the fire station, left messages at what she thought might be his apartment complex, even tried to reach him through social media. He refused all contact. Blocked her number, blocked her accounts, made it clear through silence that he had nothing to say to the woman who'd given him away like an inconvenience. She called her sister Rebecca, hoping for support. Hoping someone in her family would tell her she wasn't a monster, that she'd made hard choices under impossible circumstances, that there was still a way back from this. Instead, Rebecca finally admitted what she'd been carrying for years. I knew, Rebecca told her. Mom told me, years ago. Made me promise to keep the secret. You knew. All this time you knew and you never... What was I supposed to do, Diane? Tell your husband? Break up your family? You could have talked to me. You could have told me it wasn't right. You made your choice. Mom helped you make it. I wasn't about to be the one who blew it all up. Diane realized then, with a kind of horror I could almost feel sorry for, that her entire family had been complicit. Or at least aware. They'd all chosen silence, chosen her comfort over Brian's existence, chosen to maintain the lie because it was easier than confronting the truth. And now they were all she had left. I moved into an apartment downtown. Nothing fancy, just a clean 2-bedroom with good light and enough space for my sons to visit. The first weekend, Mark came by with Thai food and a bottle of good bourbon. We sat on my new couch, ate pad Thai out of takeout containers, and talked about everything except Diane. College football, his job, Emily, and their future. Normal things, the kind of conversations we'd always had. It felt like moving forward. Brian came by the following Tuesday. He brought his adoptive mother's famous banana bread, a recipe Carol had taught him years ago, before her mind started slipping. We ate it at my kitchen counter, and he told me about his job, about the calls that haunted him and the ones that made it all worthwhile, about the apartment he'd been renting for 6 years because he'd never felt settled enough to buy a place of his own. I used to think I couldn't commit to anything permanent because I didn't know who I was, he said. Didn't know where I came from. Maybe now that's different. Maybe it is, I agreed. I drove to Dayton on a gray afternoon about 6 weeks after the divorce papers were filed. The drive gave me time to think. 2 hours of empty highway and flat Ohio farmland, the kind of landscape that invites reflection whether you want it or not. I thought about what I was going to say to Dennis Keller. I thought about what he might say back. Mostly, I thought about the poker games we'd played in my living room back when we were neighbors. How he'd sat at my table, drunk my beer, laughed at my jokes, all while knowing what he'd done with my wife. Or maybe he hadn't known. Maybe Diane had kept the pregnancy from him too. Maybe he'd run away from guilt rather than consequences. Either way, he deserved to know he had a son. That wasn't for his sake. It was for Brian's. Dennis Keller lived in a modest apartment complex on the south side of Dayton, the kind of place where people end up after 2 divorces have taken most of what they built. I found his unit on the 3rd floor, knocked on the door, and waited. He answered in sweatpants and a stained undershirt. He was heavier than I remembered, his hair almost entirely gray now, his face carrying the puffiness of someone who'd spent too many years drowning his problems in alcohol. He squinted at me for a moment before recognition kicked in. Stephen Lawson? Hello, Dennis. He stood there with his mouth hanging open, clearly trying to figure out why a man he hadn't seen in 32 years was standing on his doorstep. I watched the calculation happen behind his eyes. The fear, the confusion, the dawning suspicion that this couldn't possibly be a social call. Can I come in? He stepped aside, too confused to refuse. His apartment was cluttered. Dishes in the sink, newspapers stacked on the coffee table, empty bottles lined up by the trash can. The home of a man who'd stopped caring about impressions a long time ago. You want a drink? He asked. I've got beer. Bourbon somewhere, I think. No. Right? Okay. He rubbed a hand over his face. What is this about, Stephen? How did you even find me? I hired a private investigator. Same one who helped me track down my son. Dennis went very still. I watched the color drain from his face, watched his eyes flick toward the door like he was calculating whether he could make a run for it. His name is Brian, I continued, keeping my voice level. He's 32 years old. He works as a firefighter in Westerville, about 20 minutes from where you and I used to be neighbors. He was adopted at birth through a private agency in Cincinnati, the same city where Diane's mother lived, the same city where Diane hid out during her pregnancy in 1992. Stephen, I'm not here to fight you, Dennis. I'm not even here for an apology, though you could offer one if you felt like being decent for once in your miserable life. He flinched but didn't speak. He'd sunk onto his couch like his legs couldn't hold him anymore, and now he was staring up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Fear, mostly. But maybe something else underneath it. I'm here because Brian deserves to know who his biological father is. Whether you want to know him is your business. I'm just making sure you know he exists. Someone should have told you 32 years ago. Dennis was quiet for a long moment. Then, in a voice that was barely a whisper, I didn't know. Didn't know what? That you slept with my wife? That you got her pregnant? That I didn't know about the pregnancy. He looked up at me, and for the first time I saw something that might have been genuine in his eyes. I swear to God, Stephen, I didn't know she was pregnant. She told me it was a few times while you were gone. She was lonely, I was lonely. When she said it was over, I left. I got transferred to Cincinnati, then to Dayton. I didn't ask questions. You ran. Yeah, I ran. He rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. I'm not proud of it. I've spent 30 years not being proud of it. But I didn't know about a baby. She never told me. I stood there looking at him. This wreck of a man who'd helped destroy my marriage without even knowing the full extent of what he'd done. It would have been easy to hate him. Part of me did hate him. But a bigger part of me just felt tired. I don't care about the affair, Dennis. Not anymore. I care about my son who spent 32 years not knowing where he came from. I have a son? You have a biological son. Brian has a father, that would be me. I'm the one who wants him. I pulled a piece of paper from my pocket. Brian's name and contact information, written in my neat handwriting, and set it on his coffee table. If you want to reach out, that's up to you. If you don't, that's up to you too. But now you know. Now you don't get to pretend you didn't. Dennis stared at the paper like it was a grenade. Stephen, he said as I turned to leave. His voice was thick. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. I've been sorry for a long time. What I did was wrong and there's no excuse for it. I'm sorry. I paused at the door. You're not the one who owes me an apology, I said. You're just the one who's willing to give it. I left him sitting on his couch and drove back to Columbus. Brian didn't reach out to Dennis. He told me about a week later, after he'd had time to think it over. Stephen Lawson is my father, he said. We were sitting in my apartment watching the Buckeyes lose to Penn State. He's the one who wanted me. Dennis Keller was just a biological donor. I don't need to know him. That's your call to make, I said. I just wanted you to have the choice. I appreciate that. Dennis eventually sent a letter through me. I'd given him my address rather than Brian's, figuring Brian could decide whether to read it. Brian did read it, sitting at my kitchen table with a beer in his hand and an expression on his face I couldn't quite interpret. Then he crumpled it up and threw it in the trash. Nothing worth keeping, he said. Just excuses. I didn't ask what the letter said. It wasn't my business. The divorce was finalized 4 months after I'd walked out of that house. Fair and equitable, as Ohio law requires. The house was sold, proceeds split. Retirement accounts divided. Diane got her share. I didn't try to punish her financially. That was never what this was about. She moved into a small condo on the west side of the city. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she was doing okay, financially at least. Emotionally was another matter. Her sons didn't visit. Her sister kept her distance. The social circle we'd built over 3 decades had quietly disintegrated around her. I didn't feel satisfaction about that. I didn't feel much of anything. She'd made her choices and now she was living with the consequences. That was simply how things were. Brian brought me to meet his adoptive mother about 6 months after we first met. Carol Tillman lived in an assisted living facility in Cincinnati. A nice place, clean and well-staffed, though you could see the sadness in her eyes even on good days. Her dementia was progressing. Some days she knew Brian. Some days she thought he was someone else entirely. This was one of her lucid days. She was sitting in a wheelchair by the window when we arrived, looking out at a garden that was just starting to bloom with early spring flowers. Brian knelt beside her and took her hand. "Mom, I want you to meet someone. This is Stephen Lawson. He's my biological father. Carol looked up at me. She was small, frail, her white hair thin and carefully combed. Her eyes were sharp, though, sharper than I'd expected. "You're the one who found him," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. He's been looking for so long." Her voice wavered, but she kept her composure. "Ever since Ray passed, I worried about what would happen when I'm gone. Who would be there for him?" "I'll be there," I said. "He's my son." She reached out and gripped my hand with surprising strength. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for finding him. Thank you for raising him. You did a wonderful job." Carol started crying then, quiet tears that she didn't try to hide. Brian was crying too, though he'd probably deny it later. I stood there holding both their hands, my eyes wet but steady. This woman had raised my son for 32 years. She'd loved him, protected him, given him everything she had. She didn't owe me anything. I owed her everything. A few weeks later, Brian called me with another piece of the puzzle. "I've been going through my dad's old papers," he said. "Mom asked me to organize them before she can't remember what they are." "That's good. Those kinds of memories matter." I found something. A receipt from 1993, from Grace Harbor Adoptions. I sat down slowly. "What kind of receipt?" $15,000. There's a note on the check stub that says, "Final payment per arrangement." $15,000 in 1993. That was a significant sum. The Tillmans hadn't been wealthy. They'd been working-class people who stretched every penny. For them to come up with that kind of money— "Private adoptions are expensive," I said carefully, "but not typically that expensive." That's what I thought. I contacted Earl Whitmore again. He dug into Grace Harbor Adoptions' history, found records of allegations that had circulated before the agency closed. Improper practices, payments being funneled through unofficial channels, records being falsified to speed through adoptions that might not have survived official scrutiny. The agency owner had died in 2011. No prosecutions ever occurred. I put it together slowly, the way I'd put together shipping routes across oceans and continents. Diane's mother, Patricia, had been wealthy. Old money from her side of the family, investments that had done well. The falsified records listing Diane as a minor. The cash payment that was well above normal agency fees. The speed with which everything had been processed. Diane and her mother hadn't just given Brian away. They'd sold him through a gray market adoption. They'd paid to make the problem disappear efficiently and permanently. I told Brian and Mark together, sitting in my apartment with beers we barely touched. "This doesn't change anything legally," I said. "Your grandmother is dead. The agency is closed. The statute of limitations expired decades ago. So she just gets away with it?" Mark's voice was tight with anger. "She's lost both her sons and her husband. She lives alone in a condo with no one to visit her. I don't know if that counts as getting away with it." Brian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I don't need her to suffer. I just need her to know that I survived, that I became someone, that she didn't succeed in erasing me." My birthday fell on a Saturday that year. Mark organized a dinner at a restaurant downtown, reserved a private room, invited Brian and his girlfriend Lauren, Earl Whitmore, Janet Reynolds, a few old colleagues from my shipping days. It was a modest gathering, maybe 15 people total. Modest, but meaningful. Diane was not invited. She wasn't mentioned at all. The dinner was good. Toasts were made, stories were shared, mostly embarrassing ones about me, which I allowed because that's what birthdays are for. Janet told a story about the first time we'd met in her office, how I'd shown up with a folder 2 inches thick full of documentation and timeline charts like I was presenting a logistics proposal rather than filing for divorce. Earl described the phone calls where I'd ask questions so specific he'd started wondering if I'd secretly worked for the CIA. Then Brian stood up. The room got quiet. He was wearing a button-down shirt and khakis, looking uncomfortable in a way that only made him seem more genuine. He cleared his throat. "I'm not great at speeches," he said. "So I'll keep this short. A year ago, I thought I'd never find my family. I'd been looking for 15 years and I was starting to accept that maybe I'd never know where I came from. Maybe I'd spend my whole life being nobody's son." He paused. The room was completely silent. Then I got a DNA match, and a message that changed everything. He looked at me across the table. Stephen Lawson didn't just accept me as his son. He fought for me to exist. He made sure everyone knew I mattered. He blew up his whole life so that I wouldn't have to spend the rest of mine wondering. His voice caught, but he kept going. That's what a father does. Not the biology, not the blood test, the choosing. He chose me. He raised his glass. "Happy birthday, Dad." I didn't cry, but it was close. After the dinner, I walked outside with both my sons. The night was clear and cold, one of those late fall evenings where you can see your breath and the stars seem closer than usual. We stood on the sidewalk outside the restaurant, none of us quite ready to say goodnight. "So what's next for you, Dad?" Brian asked. "Now that you've retired, uncovered a 30-year conspiracy, gotten divorced, and rebuilt your family?" I thought about it. The genealogy project that had started all this was still sitting on my laptop, half finished. Those roots in County Cork that my grandmother had always talked about. "I was thinking about taking a trip," I said. "To Ireland. Looking for those ancestors I started searching for a year ago." Mark grinned. "Need some company?" Brian nodded. "I've got vacation time saved up." I looked at my sons, both of them, standing there in the cold with their breath fogging the air between us. 2 men I'd helped raise, one from birth, one from discovery. Both of them mine. "I was hoping you'd say that." I found out later that Diane had tried to call me that night, my birthday. She'd dialed the number and let it ring once before hanging up. I wouldn't have answered anyway. She lives alone now, in that condo on the west side, with nobody to call and nowhere to go. Her social circle evaporated within months of the divorce. People don't say anything directly, but the invitations stopped coming a long time ago. Rebecca visits occasionally, out of family obligation more than affection. Mark and Brian haven't spoken to her since the confrontation. She made her choices. She chose silence and deception over honesty, chose her own comfort over her child's existence, chose to build a life on a foundation of lies and hoped the foundation would hold forever. It didn't. I don't wish her suffering. I don't wish her anything at all. She simply exists now, in a world she constructed and then watched collapse. That's not revenge. That's just consequences. My world is different. I have an apartment with good light, a trip to Ireland planned for spring, and 2 sons who call me every week. Brian's talking about proposing to Lauren. Mark's engagement to Emily is set for June. I'll probably have grandchildren before too long. Children who will know their whole family, who will never have to wonder where they came from or why they weren't kept. That's enough. That's more than enough. The genealogy project is still on my laptop, by the way. I keep meaning to get back to it. Those roots in County Cork are still there, waiting to be discovered. But I'm not in a hurry anymore. I found what I was really looking for.